Hey everyone, and welcome to another of these Trails character analyses. This time, let's talk about Estelle Bright, the girl who started it all for the Trails series, being its first ever protagonist, and therefore setting a high bar for the quality we've come to expect out of the Trails MCs in the following games. So what makes her so great? What exactly makes Estelle Bestelle? The answer is honestly different for every person who has come to love her. I mean, Estelle holds a special place in my heart since I can really relate to her in a couple ways. I'll go more into that when those points come up, but in this video overall, I'll do my best to uncover exactly why Estelle is so fantastic by diving into her personality, character development, and overall role in the story. And just as a heads up, because this is a deep dive analysis, there will be spoilers from the entire series in this video. Now let's dive right in. So first, let's nail down some of her personality. There's absolutely a reason for her moniker, Estelle Bright, and the descriptor that's thrown around all the time for her. Come on, you know which one I'm talking about. Estelle shines like the sun. And so, like the sun, Estelle demonstrates a tremendous amount of energy and positivity. She's shown to have possessed these traits from the very beginning, given the detailed insight we get into her childhood in Moondor 4 from Sky the Third. While Joshua is worried about retaliation from the society, Estelle's able to pick up on his low spirits. She busts out her "no grumpy faces allowed" phrase and rushes off in a burst of energy to grab something that would cheer him up. This is a lot of effort for someone she basically just met. But before I get further into her capacity for kindness and compassion, I first want to touch on the boldness of her personality. Basically, how she's quite brash both with word and action, which results in a character who is not afraid to speak her mind. The way she demonstrates this trait fascinates me when compared to the two other main protagonists in Trails. And before you get your panties in a bunch, let me say that I love Kevin too. He's actually my favorite protag and probably my favorite character in the entire series. But let's face it, he's only an MC for one game, and one of the shorter ones at that. And sorry, Nayuta, but hardly anyone knows you, my boy. I'll be bringing up Lloyd and Reen from time to time, though. So back on topic to Estelle's brash nature, this goes pretty hand in hand with her snark. And let's face it, Estelle is at her best when she's dishing the snarky sass at her adversaries, and friends alike. Olivier is always just asking for it. And let's not forget the whole "why is my present a boy" from small Estelle at the very beginning of the entire Trails series. It's amazing to me that Falcom had the guts to go with a female main character, and not only that, but a loud and even obnoxious one at that, especially when considering the cultural norms in Japan. I am of Japanese ancestry, with my mom hailing directly from Nippon, and I remember the summers spent with her side of the family. There's definitely an expected social custom / unspoken rule about maintaining group harmony, aka Asian Collectivism 101, which is taken to the max with Japanese customs and the language. Therefore, pleasantries and politeness is important in conversation for both genders, though it's even more pronounced for women. Sure, you can be a bit more forthright with people you know well, like close family and friends, but not when you're meeting people for the first time. Estelle has no reservations though, and is not afraid to be frank in her initial meetings with Olivier and Agate, for instance. That's why I'm quite curious as to what the initial reaction to Estelle was for the Japanese community. When we look at the following arc's protagonists, Lloyd and Reen, they are much more agreeable and definitely less overbearing by nature. Sure, they stand up to people who exploit others or people who are acting like general assholes, but the both of them are less likely to just dish out the snark the way Estelle just naturally does. This can be seen as rather obnoxious at first, especially if you're a female. In Estelle's very own arc, the Sky arc, Chloe appears to be a much better fit when it comes to upholding Japanese social norms, what with her grace, demure nature, and thoughtfulness before speaking. It's this amalgamation of things that makes me wonder if some of the early Trails community was turned off by Estelle before she finally won them over. 'Cause let's be real, who isn't won over by Bestelle eventually? Though you know what? I can also see how Estelle could be considered a breath of fresh air, cathartic even, for being so unconventional in a culture that values niceties over frankness. While we're on this note, this video would be lacking if I don't mention how Estelle is a spunky tomboy through and through. However, she's still in touch with her girly side, as seen when she enjoys shopping at the department stores and even possesses an affinity for cute things, though not to the extent of Anna Loss. She's also pretty shy about dressing in more feminine clothing, but she welcomes it without any complaint. I just love this added nuance as we see the balance between her boyish side and her girlish charm and feminine interests. She really has close relationships with the other females in the party, which is nice to see in any medium, since unfortunately there's this narrative of how girls who are able to hang with the guys are therefore unable to relate to other women. Sure, I guess that can happen, but it's way more realistic to see that even tomboys have a lot of feminine interests that connects them to other girls. So we got a part of her personality defined, and we'll return to it when we start talking about her compassion and empathy, but I first want to touch on what motivates Estelle. What is it that drives her ideals and the way she wants to live her life? We can see how her father has had a strong influence on her dream to become a bracer, but it appears that her desire to help others manifested long ago. And I believe her late mother's legacy, in particular, plays a strong role in this. Right after Sky FC's prologue, and right before they head off on their real journey, Estelle tells Joshua about her mom's passing. She doesn't shy away from the truth and retells the events exactly as they occurred, and they're not pretty. Because young Estelle put herself in a dangerous position, what with climbing up to the clock tower's roof as Roland was being bombarded by air raids, her mom was left with no choice in order to protect her daughter. They found Estelle miraculously alive in the rubble because her mom shielded her from the debris. Estelle was only a child then, meaning that her brain and ability to think rationally was nowhere near developed. So of course it's understandable that children do stupid things. Surely Estelle felt, and always will in some capacity feel, guilt for indirectly causing her own mother's death. But if I can say this, what's beautiful about this tragedy is that Estelle chooses to use it as her strength. Though she says she doesn't want to rely on her mom, using her legacy as inspiration is a perfectly healthy way to channel this tragedy. It's unspoken but easy to see that Estelle's desire to see to her dad's safety, a desire that extends to every other civilian she helps out as a bracer, is partly a result of her mother's early death and sacrifice for her daughter. I also draw inspiration from my late mom's legacy. To keep a long story short, she was sick with a terminal illness for many years before she eventually passed. What amazed me, though, was the strength of her spirit, that she remained optimistic and compassionate to everyone who came to visit, even during her final year of life, in which she was completely bedridden. It's her influence in large part that has helped me to avoid dwelling on bitterness, as I've learned to adapt to my own hard-hitting neurological illness and physical disability ever since I was diagnosed 4 years ago with transverse myelitis. Her memory, as well as our Christian faith, helps me to remain optimistic. But I don't want to get too preachy. Estelle sharing about her mom just really helped me connect to her as a protagonist right from the get-go. Which, by the way, is such a breath of fresh air to see a main character share her backstory and struggle straight away in the game. In other JRPGs, it often takes over half the game to get to that big reveal. But here, Estelle stays transparent with us from the get-go. This is just the first taste we get of her tendency to wear her heart on her sleeve and her ability to channel adversity into strength. This early scene also sells how close Estelle and Joshua are and how much she trusts him with this information. Joshua is worried about Estelle and is quick to add that he'll support her in any way he can, before she turns the situation on its head with another display of her bright optimism. This interaction between the two will help color the way us as players expect the development of the two's relationship to progress. This event, combined with so many more throughout the game, is what makes the end of FC all the more heart-wrenching. So once again, before we dive further into Estelle's relationship with Joshua and with the wider party, let's take a look at how she interacts with the world. Right from the get-go, we clearly see that she's a born and bred Roland girl. She's friendly, sociable, and is able to get along with all ages as demonstrated by her interactions with the townsfolk during the prologue. The game wants to start us off with a sense of ease and familiarity, since Estelle is the only protag so far who starts off in not only her hometown, but the only home she's ever known. On the other hand, Lloyd is just returning to Crossbell after spending years away, and Reen starts off experiencing Trista for the first time in Cold Steel. It's not until we leave Roland that we see just how much of a small-town girl Estelle really is. What stood out to me is Estelle's response to Olivier when he hits on Joshua. The way she questions if Olivier is one of those people reminded me of how someone would ask about a legend or a myth, essentially with sheer disbelief that someone like him can actually exist. Since Estelle grew up in a small town, one that doesn't have nearly as big a population or get as many tourists as cities like Beauce and Rouen do, she understandably is quite sheltered when it comes to meeting diverse groups of people. I'm sure that those who grew up in bustling cities such as Heimdall or Crossbell are way less likely to question people's background, demeanor, or taste, since they are more likely to have seen it all. Estelle's limited knowledge of the cutting-edge technological advancements of the kingdom also highlights her small-town upbringing. Historically, advancements in tech takes the longest to reach rural areas, and Roland is a pretty quaint town compared to the other cities in Liberal. I really hope I'm not sounding overtly negative or even elitist when it comes to small towns. All I'm trying to get at is that Estelle grew up quite sheltered at no fault of her own or anyone else's. It's important to touch on this aspect of her because the Estelle at the end of Sky SC and onwards is a far cry from the naive Roland girl from the beginning of Sky FC. So, how does she acquire her newfound knowledge? Well, Estelle learns best through hands-on experiences. Even from the very beginning, Joshua teases Estelle over how she's not very book smart. She doesn't like studying and doesn't do her homework. This is confirmed in action when Estelle has trouble recalling facts about orbments or the guild's history, for instance. She's reluctant to do anything involving the pen and paper, or reading for that matter, but ultimately recognizes that some of these things are necessary for her to do her job well. She's very different from Joshua, who excels at and even enjoys a more scholastic kind of education. This distinct trait of hers is also contrasted nicely with the two other main protagonists, Lloyd and Reen, both who went to prestigious academies and did well in the academic aspects. Estelle, on the other hand, is not very interested in abstract concepts in general. What Estelle does possess are excellent practical skills and a good head on her shoulders, aka valuable qualities for a bracer. Her common sense means that she can generally pick up on shady situations, usually right in the nick of time. But there's really no denying that Estelle relied on Joshua a lot when it came to information gathering and thinking critically to avoid unnecessarily escalating any given situation. It was Joshua who held her back when she wanted to rush in without developing any kind of plan first. This whole complementary dynamic of Estelle and Joshua's personalities, where one values the strengths of the other, is one of the reasons why their relationship works so well. In fact, one of the side quests with Duke Dunan highlights Estelle channeling her inner Joshua, depending on which way the player decides to answer. The exploration of their dynamic is taken to the next level, starting with the separation period in Sky SC. I mean, there's a reason the phrase, "absence makes the heart grow fonder," exists. Not only does this make their eventual reunion so sweet, but the entire separation forces Estelle to grow leaps and bounds since she can no longer rely on Joshua's level-headedness. She must begin thinking ahead for herself, coming up with a basic plan of action that has the best bet of strengthening both her physical and mental skill. This involves accepting Shara's suggestion of heading to the Bracer headquarters in Lemon State to improve herself. Doing so better prepares her for all the unexpected and crazy situations in the rest of SC that have indirect ties to Joshua's whereabouts. While working as a bracer, she's able to continue her dream of protecting people while also benefiting from the constant traveling, as that's where leads can be picked up regarding a person's location. In Sky SC, Estelle demonstrates extra thought and rational analysis before making a decision, and this is fortunately without losing sight of the snarky side we've all grown to love. Without Joshua, Estelle's relationships with the rest of the cast get a chance to shine as well. I think this point also ties in nicely with how this game also explores struggle and grief in a realistic way. An aspect of this I want to highlight is how Estelle really begins opening up to the others in her party, relying on them for emotional support when her go-to Joshua is no longer around. So let's go over how Estelle's journey with grief is handled realistically. You may have heard of the whole 5 stages of grief concept. Well, let me just say that this approach is home to dangerous misconceptions. Studies have reached this conclusion, and this is also coming from someone who has studied and received training in psychotherapy, as well as a person who has dealt with her own emotional lows. The truth is, coping with any kind of profound loss is much more complex than what this 5 stages theory can adequately explain. Any of these 5 stages listed are going to happen in any order at any given time. Anything can trigger any one of these feelings, and the trigger can be a certain smell, or sight, or song. Observing some sort of situation outside, or even one you're facing right now, can remind you of some sort of adversity you've had to deal with. And depending on how in touch you are with emotions in general, it's not uncommon to not even recognize what feeling has cropped up, if one is even recognized at all. In Estelle's case, she faces profound grief right from the beginning of her journey in Sky SC, where she happens to take on a state of denial. So much so that she boards an airship back to Roland, telling herself that the disappeared Joshua must have gone back home. The final result of Estelle's rush to get back home is the first time we see her so defeated. And it's not like she hasn't faced terrible situations before. She's hit with some pretty somber news even at the beginning of the previous game. The word gets out in Chapter 1 of FC that the airliner her dad boarded, called the Lind, has gone completely missing. That night, Joshua and Shara share worried thoughts about Estelle's state when she doesn't come down for dinner right away. But it turns out that Estelle really does shine like the sun, since she wasn't sulking like the other two were suspecting. Instead, she was packing up the necessary belongings she'd need for the journey she's planning to take to find Cassius herself. In the opening moments of Sky SC though, Estelle cycles through a few of the emotions in that 5 stages concept. I actually love seeing this because it shows how even the most optimistic people can't always be bright, positive, and cheery every second of their lives. I've always been a more optimistic, the glass is always half full kind of person myself, but failing to acknowledge difficult moments is honestly just not healthy. Thankfully, Kevin Graham, a compassionate fellow who didn't leave the greatest first impression, is there to look out for Estelle, phoning in her father and Shara. Unlike Lloyd and Reen, Bestelle doesn't shy away from vulnerability. As we've mentioned earlier, she wears her heart on her sleeve and isn't afraid to accept the support of others. We see it in this scene and later on in the Roland chapter as well. I also need to acknowledge Falcom's stellar script writing and Exceed's masterful localization at play here during this touching moment in the Bright family. It's an excellent example of taking responsibility and healthy communication. Cassius has seen the light thanks to Shara and apologizes to his daughter for saying such insensitive things right after Joshua's sudden departure. He entrusts Estelle with bringing him back home, as his daughter allows herself to share a few tears in her father's arms. Fast forwarding through the first couple chapters, we see that Estelle is doing much better, what with a full schedule of fulfilling bracer work, Ouroboros searching, and the helpful backing of her friends. Then, unexpectedly, grief strikes all over again. First with that letter from Ren in Chapter 3, and then especially when Dorothy hands over that photo of Joshua with the Capuas. Estelle is able to get through that busy day solely because the situation is so dire, but later that night she finally shares what's got her so depressed with Shara. What is Joshua doing in that photo? And the ethical dilemma of whether she should hand it in to the authorities because of the stolen bobcat. Big Sis Shara helps walk Estelle through her thoughts, with the latter opening up about her troubles to the entire party by the end of the chapter. So, coming to accept the situation as is, Bestelle does nothing less than push forward relentlessly, without looking back. We've already seen this resolve in the Luciola-prompted dream sequence, where Estelle is offered the temptation of staying in a world where her late mom is still alive. But Bestelle departs from the happy memories, choosing to return to the difficulties, yet beauty of living in reality. From that point on, everyone around her, even Ouroboros members, can do nothing to dampen her light. Her interactions with Ren, and especially Louve, showcase her optimism and determinism. I mean, Louve flat out tells her she would never make a good enforcer, since there's no darkness within her. Of course he doesn't mean that she can do absolutely no wrong. He's just referring to how, at the end of the day, even if she may be tempted by more unscrupulous methods, her personal morality will always result in her turning down any malicious temptations. So how does she get out of this situation? Well, she puts her newfound skills to good use, successfully getting past the guards and nearly to the hangar, though her sheer guts can only carry her so far. By fortunate happenstance, Joshua was already aboard the Glorious at this time, in the attempts of bringing it down. The two escape together and finally have their big reunion on the beach. Now, I'd like to transition into a topic we briefly covered earlier on, and that's Estelle's overall growth from a naive small-town girl to a learned traveler who has done a lot of introspection on her new experiences. Here, Estelle admits for herself that she's encountered a lot since Joshua left, things that challenged her worldview and has helped her read others better. She understands now how common it is for people to shut out their traumas, even dissociating themselves from them to get away from the pain of having to confront it and cope with it to move forward. She can see Joshua's perspective and understands why he thought leaving was the best way to keep his loved ones safe. But of course Estelle can't agree with that. She doesn't want the guy she loves to live as an emotionally unhealthy wreck for the rest of his life. This scene highlights another aspect of Estelle's growing maturity, since the girl in Sky FC was always really flustered and shy when it came to thinking of Joshua in a romantic lens. Now she's able to confess truthfully to him without any hesitations. She holds him while he shows vulnerability, actually shedding some tears for the first time since his sister died. The writing, the OST, the lighting, everything about this scene works together to create a truly beautiful masterpiece of storytelling by Nihon Falcom. Later down the line, Estelle meets Ren again. Once again, Falcom demonstrates something akin to their realistic take on grief. In this case, Falcom shows how a person is never done growing. Even though Estelle was just portrayed as more mature in her reunion with Joshua, she has yet to face a situation in which she must delve into the perspective of an actively malicious antagonist. Like what most people would do, she only focuses on how the society is leaving a bad example on Ren. She doesn't realize that she's missed a vital part of why the young enforcer emotionally relies on Ouroboros. With her worldview challenged once again, Estelle is feeling guilty after Ren shared a small sliver of her backstory. The former admits that she only grew up in Roland, and therefore is a bit sheltered. But we can't blame Estelle for her upbringing. That's just how it is. The great news is that, like the journey she's already taken so far, Bestelle learns through her experiences. She begins to empathize more with Ren, wanting to view things from her point of view at each new encounter. Estelle demonstrates tremendous compassion along with a capacity for forgiveness. Remember how Ren faked that letter from Joshua back in the Grand Soul chapter? Obviously knowing that it would hurt Estelle. Even so, Estelle doesn't hesitate to put that behind her, since it's so easy for her to cognitively empathize with Ren. And yes, there are different kinds of empathy. In this case, I'm referring to the perspective-taking subcategory of cognitive empathy. And now to our final topic. Estelle goes absolutely above and beyond for the people she cares about. The entire party can rely on her to always have their backs, but she especially goes the extra mile for Joshua and Ren, two former enforcers who she managed to convert to the good side just by being her big ball of sunshine self. You know, out of all the Trails pro tags we've had so far, and as far as I know, having played just to CS3, Estelle is the only one to have successfully converted an Ouroboros enforcer, let alone 3 of them. Unfortunately, the third met an untimely demise at the hands of his former boss. So we've already touched on her insane journey while searching for Joshua, so let's now take a look at a scene that happens on the Liber arc. One that highlights her absolute adoration of him even as he's being controlled by the Wiseman-implanted stigma. During this tense moment where Joshua has her at knife point, she shows no fear, only love and trust. Estelle's not naive though. If she really is unable to make it out alive, she only hopes that her beloved Joshua won't blame himself for what happens to her, for ending his love's life with his own hands. The real kicker is that she says this all with a smile on her face, wanting to comfort Joshua even though he's threatening her life. Let's all have a toast for Kevin Graham then, otherwise this could have ended really messily. She demonstrates the same kind of patience and unconditional love towards Ren for months as she and Joshua search for her after Sky SC's ending. Because of her superb emotional intelligence, Estelle can tell deep down that Ren wants to be with the Brights. But she respects the young girl's right to decide that for herself, especially after finding out about the atrocities at Paradise that stripped Ren of all self-determination. Estelle endures Ren's harsh words and her lashing out, never giving up on her quest to provide the girl a real home. The wild chase continues, from Sky the Third and throughout Zero. It's really touching to see how these events highlight how much Estelle's heart pours out for Ren, while demonstrating how healthy and strong her relationship is with Joshua at the same time. It's also Joshua's turn to offer the brunt of emotional support to Estelle, showcasing a reciprocation of roles that is healthy in any relationship. It's just Falcom masterfully piling on further growth, since vice versa was going on in Sky SC, what with the focus on Estelle emotionally supporting Joshua. Estelle's never-give-in personality, along with the help from the SSS and Potter Mater, finally wins out in the end as Ren is plopped down in front of the 2 bracers. If you want analysis of Ren's side of this from her very own perspective, I suggest you check out my video on the Enforcer linked in the cards above. Finally, I'd like to bring attention to how this ending shows the Bright arc coming full circle. Just as Cassius adopted an enforcer into his household all those years ago, Bestelle has now adopted a now former enforcer into the Bright family house as well. And thanks so much for watching, guys. It really helped me out if you leave a like if you liked it, and be sure to subscribe to catch more Trails character analyses in the future. Big thanks to my patrons for the support and for voting in these polls that determine which character gets a video next. Let me know what you like best about Estelle, or leave your favorite moment of her in the comments below. And until next time, take care, see ya!